Marketplace is supported by Putnam Investments, recognizing the value of financial advice since 1937. Putnam Investments, a world of investing. Produced in association with the University of Southern California.
I'm sure if we tried, we could think of something less sexy than international banking regulations. But for a certain slice of the global economy, namely the slice that controls all the money, Basel, Switzerland is where it's at. There are some important new rules today for how much money banks have to keep in the bank. From American Public Media, this is Marketplace.
Marketplace is supported by Nixon Peabody LLP, a full-service international law firm offering practical solutions for today's real-world business challenges. More at nixonpeabody.com. And by Progressive Insurance, with more than 30,000 local independent agents. Information available at progressive.com.
From the Frank Stanton Studios in Los Angeles, I'm Kai Ryssdal. Glad to have you here on this Monday, everybody. It's the 13th of September. Basel, Switzerland was the center of the banking universe this week. And the subject at hand, something called Tier 1 capital requirements, does not roll trippingly off the tongue. But normally straight-laced banking regulators are, relatively speaking, passionate about it. They say the agreement, known as Basel III to the in-crowd, might just be the most important thing yet to help avoid future crises. Banks are going to have to triple their reserves as a guard against loans going bad. Our Washington Bureau Chief John Dimsdale reports.
By requiring banks to set aside $7 for every 100 they lend, regulators hope to even out the ups and downs of the banking economy. Some wanted an even fatter cushion. Douglas Elliott of the Brookings Institution says 7% is watered down, but he understands why.
There's a really important trade-off here, which is we know that requiring more capital makes banks safer, but it also makes it more expensive for them to lend. That hurts the economy. I'd have liked to see a little more safety purchased by a little less economic growth.
During boom times, when lending is strong, banks will be required to build up their capital. That'll help avoid bubbles when banks go after too many loans, and it sets aside money for a rainy day, says Accenture bank analyst Edwin van der Odera.
Clearly, in bad times, it's difficult to build up the cushion because that's when you need it. So therefore, they say banks should be asked to increase the size of the cushion when things are going well, rather than just give all the money back to shareholders. And then they can start absorbing shocks gradually as they go during the bad times.
U.S. banks say they can live with the new capital requirements since they already have, for the most part, built up that cushion. Scott Talbot is with the industry's Financial Services Roundtable.
If you remember last year, U.S. banks went through a stress test with buffer capital requirements. So U.S. capital levels are high. European banks aren't quite as high.
That vulnerability prompted Europe to demand that the capital requirements be phased in over 8 years, which some criticize as too long. Still, the agreement is expected to be ratified by the leaders of the G20 industrial countries when they meet next in November. In Washington, I'm John Dimsdale for Marketplace.
Come with me now to a different world, a world where there are no Wi-Fi dead zones, no slow internet connections that make downloads more trouble than they're worth. It is possible, the Federal Communications Commission is meeting next week to talk about something called white space, a chunk of the airwaves that aren't used at the moment, and whether or not to make that chunk available to the public. It could, if everything works out, lead to all kinds of new devices and make your current gadgets work better and faster. From North Carolina Public Radio, Janet Babin reports.
Think of the airwaves like real estate on the Monopoly board. Back in 1985, the FCC opened up the low-rent Baltic Avenue of the frequency spectrum. These waves could barely penetrate walls, and no company wanted them. But Daniel Berninger with Go Cypher says those waves are why we now have everything from garage door openers to Wi-Fi.
The whole Wi-Fi universe and all the money that's made on Wi-Fi was an accidental consequence of opening up this area of spectrum.
The frequencies the FCC will address next week are the airwaves between TV channels. They easily penetrate walls and can travel fast over long distances.
So this is definitely beachfront or, boardwalk property.
Big tech companies like Google, Microsoft, and Dell are anxious to use this spectrum to deliver more content faster. It could also launch a new round of innovation.